You may have seen my unboxing of the new 12.9-inch iPad Pro. If you haven't, you can check it out here. But now it's time for the review. Can this thing truly replace your laptop, or is it just a big iPad? So first off, the design. This thing is gorgeous. For 13 inches, it's definitely the lightest device I've ever seen. So if you want to compare it to laptops, then this guy wins by a long shot, coming in at only 1.57 pounds. For comparison, the Dell XPS 13 weighs 2.6 pounds. So much lighter than nearly every laptop, but then again, it doesn't look or is designed like a laptop. It feels also thin beyond belief at only 6.9 millimeters. Now I've opted for the space gray version, but it also comes in gold and silver. If you buy the 9.7-inch iPad Pro, then you can also get rose gold. It has a Touch ID sensor for a home button, a great feature that I'll talk about later. The power button is annoyingly on the top right of the device, which is good for neither landscape nor portrait mode. The volume buttons are way too high as well, again useless for landscape and portrait mode. It would have made more sense to put the buttons on the top or bottom of the device, maybe 1/3 in from the corners, because that's the best for landscape, which is primarily what this device is for. There are 4 speakers around the device which are side firing, not as good as front firing, but not as bad as back firing. Now if they were front firing speakers, then they would be perfect since the iPad is large enough you could get some sense of sound immersion. I mean, not as much immersion as having big speakers on either side of your 6-foot desk, but still way better than most devices. In comparison to a laptop, I would say it depends highly on the laptop, but for the most part, these are probably still a better option. One huge complaint I have though is that if you're holding the iPad, then even at medium volume, you can feel the iPad vibrating, and it's crazy distracting and annoying. Also, there's the 3-pin connection along the left long side of the iPad, which is open to developers to create cases with special function and etc. For now, I'm using it with the iPad Smart keyboard case. Now for the display. Obviously the biggest part of this device, it's a 2032 by 2048, which is so much higher than 1080p, which is basically the universal size for laptops, so in that respect the iPad also wins here. However, stupidly you can't take advantage of the screen size because the resolution is nowhere near 16 by 9, so there are huge black bars on the top and bottom. Nonetheless though, this device is still a media consumption tablet. The mini speakers, the large screen, the long battery life that I'll talk about later, all screams media consumption to me, not really for work or ruggedness. There are 2 mics that have plenty fine audio quality, if that matters to you. Now for the camera, I'm purely talking about this as a reviewer in case you want to use the device in private in any way you want as a camera, but I just want to be clear when I say this. I don't want anyone to be using this 13-inch iPad Pro to take photos or videos in public. It does have an 8-megapixel camera, which is honestly good enough for most users. The one problem I have is the sensor. This iPad is monstrous. Why is the camera sensor so tiny? I feel like if they were really serious about the camera, they could have found space for a larger sensor. Even a sensor the size of the one that's in the Galaxy phones would have been welcome, but no. This brings up a huge problem because whenever you're not outside, basically, there's noise in the photo. The camera processing software is definitely far behind that of the iPhone. Now the dynamic range still leaves a little bit something to be desired, but it's honestly pretty good. You can see here how the clouds are just slightly blown out. The white balance is actually really reliable. I still wish they gave a manual white balance option, but the automatic is about 75 to 85% accurate. It deals with yellow light way better than the Samsung Galaxy S6 does, so that's a plus. Oh, and another ridiculous thing, the front-facing camera is only 1.2 megapixels, which means yes, it only records in 720p. This is nothing short of ridiculous. It's 2016 for God's sakes. Nearly everyone has an internet connection good enough for 1080p FaceTime calls, but you can't make them because Apple was too cheap to include a proper camera. Well, I guess they just need something to do for the iPad Pro too. Now for the OS, iOS 9. I'm not going to go through all the features that Apple added from iOS 8, merely I'm going to talk about how the experience is different on a device of this size. In short, it's the same. The multitasking feature, I suppose, is more useful because not everything is so cramped. However, I was never really a big fan of the multitasking feature before anyways, especially since whenever I swipe in from the right, it almost never works. The notification page is redesigned for the iPad, so it's way more organized, but that's hardly a feature because the notification page has always been horrendous for iOS, and that's pretty much it. Wait, the home screen works in landscape mode, but that works on all the iPads and the iPhone 6s Plus too, I believe, but correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. I'm not complaining or anything. iOS is great. I prefer Android, but I appreciate the speed and stability of iOS. And anything would look good on this iPad. YouTube, Netflix, anything entertainment related is really enjoyable because of the resolution and color accuracy. It does pretty well in glare as well because it has an anti-reflective coating on it. However, it doesn't even compare to a matte display, but that's a decision for you. If you're outside a lot, then this might not be the device for you. One thing you absolutely need is some sort of stand. Even though this guy only weighs 1.6 pounds, it gets tiring to hold for any extended period of time. That is one advantage a laptop has. It has a stand on its own. If you plan on using this for work, then get a keyboard stand, which definitely has the opportunity to be good, since if you think about the size of the iPad, that means that a company could make technically a full-size keyboard case. For battery life, it gets about 11 hours out of its 38.5 watt battery. That is more than enough for a full day of work. In my testing, the iPad can constantly be on from 9 to 5 and still have 15 to 30% battery at the end of the day, which is really impressive. Much longer battery than nearly any laptop except for the MacBook Air perhaps. Also, in sleep mode, no device can sip battery like the iPad Pro. You can leave it in sleep mode for the whole night and expect at most 5% decrease in battery. This increased battery life is partly due to the A9X processor, which is a dual-core processor clocked at 2.26 GHz. Apple claims that this CPU has 1.8 times the CPU performance than the A8X and 2 times the GPU performance. Now, it is a 64-bit processor, but the device only has 4 GB of RAM. But don't get me wrong, 4 GB is more than enough RAM for a light OS like iOS. This thing is buttery smooth. I couldn't find a single hiccup while I've used it for my testing, not one little bit of lag. Plus, if you ask me, this device has the performance to be future-proof for a while, which is good because with the price of this thing, you probably won't have the money to buy anything else for a while. So since we're here, let's talk about the price. The iPad Pro 12.9-inch starts off at a hefty $800. That gets you the 32 GB version, but you can go all the way up to 256, which will run you a steep $1,099. But then, for all you graphic designers out there, you want the Apple Pencil too, it'll cost you another $100. For that amount of money, you could nearly buy an Apple MacBook Pro, you could definitely buy a MacBook Air, or you could buy 2 iPad Airs. In all, you have to be really committed to iOS to even consider shelling out that much money. But if you really want this thing and you really are into iOS and really don't want a laptop, then perhaps this is the device for you. It has a big screen that's great for media consumption, even though the screen factor isn't for media consumption, but that's your choice in the end. Guys, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please leave a like and maybe subscribe. Other than that, I will catch you guys later.